Hi, this is Bighara, and this is a video blog I'm trying out for discussing various topics in old school tabletop role-playing games, particularly things like classic Dungeons and Dragons and some of the various retro clones currently on the market for it. Today I thought I'd talk about races class, which is, for those of you not familiar with that particular term, in certain versions of the classic Dungeons and Dragons and in some of the retro clones, largely pre-advanced Dungeons and Dragons, if you were a non-human or demi-human character, your race, dwarf, elf, halfling, was your class. You weren't a halfling cleric, you were a halfling, etc. You can find an awful lot about this out on various message boards and blogs and things like that on the internet, and you can see a lot of people debating or discussing this topic. And there's basically a lot of people who fall down on the side of the fence saying, I don't really like it. I think it's too limiting for player creativity or character flexibility, what have you. And then you have people who like it, and they have their reasons as well. I was going to talk a little bit about the main arguments I hear on both sides of the fence, just one or two for each, and then talk a little bit about what I think about the subject. On the con side, like I said, you have a lot of people who feel that it's limiting, that, well, what if I want to play a halfling cleric? And then you have people who feel that not only does it limit a player's creativity in terms of things they can think up to do with their character, or types of characters they can make up in their imagination, it limits how the character can be played. It makes the character more vanilla or cookie cutter, or not really distinctive from any other member of its race that happens to be on a character sheet. On the pro side, for races class, several people will make argument saying that they like the way that it helps enforce strong archetypes. That basically it's saying that if you're a particular class, you fall into a particular category of abilities and things like that as far as what's on paper, and that gives you a certain role within the party, certain strengths and weaknesses, and that helps keep things sort of balanced to a certain degree in terms of what each character can do or not do in terms of their class abilities. And also, in a lot of the old school gaming, this is certainly not universally true, but I think it's safe to say it's fairly prevalent that a lot of people play a game where non-human characters and non-player characters are fairly unusual. It's a world where mostly it's human, and the idea that an elf or a dwarf is an unusual sight in human lands is pretty common. And along those lines, the idea that if you do actually encounter a dwarven PC, it would be a fairly unusual dwarf, and therefore probably representing a fairly small segment of the population of dwarfs that would go adventuring into human lands, and therefore be more likely to fit a certain archetype. So, for myself, I like races class. I didn't used to. I used to be kind of down on it. I used to think a lot of what I was saying before about it being limiting. But over time I've warmed up to it a bit. And for one reason, I've kind of come to really like the idea of the stronger archetypes, but also because of the humanocentric reasons. That said, I also believe that the game, as I've come to become more and more familiar with it, and when I say the game, I'm referring to classic Dungeons and Dragons and the retro clone, specifically what's referred to as Mulvey Cook Basic Expert, which, I don't know if you've seen, this is a cover, let's get the camera to work, of the Mulvey rules, which came out in 1981, and then the retro clone Labyrinth Lord, which is an emulation of those rules of Basic and Expert together. As I've become more familiar with those rules, I've seen more how it can be a framework to kind of build your own game on. And that can happen a couple ways. That may be another topic for another day, but touching briefly on it, it's not just a question of building a lot of house rules, which you can do very easily. But I think that a lot of the creativity and a lot of the fun with using these kinds of lighter rules comes from the players and the GM coming up with creative ways to play within the rules or without actually changing the rules that have nothing to do with what's written down on the character sheet. And this goes into things like the player's skill at solving certain problems instead of just making a die roll, actually describing how you're going to build that rope bridge to get over the chasm or whatever, as well as role playing and making that character an interesting character, not only to play but for other people to play with at the table. Because I think that when you look back on a lot of the games that over the years that you've played, especially if you're someone like me who's been playing for over 30 years, you don't remember the character sheet. You remember the events at the table. You remember that when, Loco the dwarf jumped on the back of the dragon or whatever. It's not anything to do with, oh, you had a really cool multi-class combination or whatever it was. Now, all that said, I also think that if a GM is willing to work with their players and a player has a really good concept, I think it's not hard to do some sort of house ruling or tweaking to allow them to play that. But before going into a lot of changing around the rules or doing customized tweaks, I think that a lot can be done, like I say, just with creativity there at the table, with role-playing and with, just being a creative, intelligent player. The GM has to cooperate with that. The GM has to be willing to say, okay, even though you're not really a cleric in the sense that you don't have cleric written on your character sheet, you can say, yes, I'm actually a missionary from the elven deities, and I'm on a mission to spread the good word to heathen elves or non-elves and make them understand what we believe in and promote peace and harmony, or maybe just shoot some orcs, whatever. And maybe you can't turn undead, but I think that you could be given the opportunities in game to excuse me, you could be given the opportunities in game to kind of role play that a bit and maybe even see some sort of benefit from it, to say, yes, oh, they see your priestly robes and they ask you, well, please come in, and you may actually get some sort of in-game reaction from NPCs or the like, which could be beneficial, or likewise could be detrimental. I mean, the bad guys might see, oh, he's a holy man. Let's take him out, even though you're not actually a spell wielding cleric, or whatever. So in any case, I guess what I'm trying to say is I like the races class for that kind of game. It's not necessarily for everybody. You got to do what's fun for you and your group. And I think that a lot of the issues that people have about stifled creativity or inflexibility are actually fairly easily overcome, or really not existent in my mind, as long as you understand the idea of the way these games, I think, were originally meant to be played, and that they are supposed to be a light framework of rules on which you use as guidelines, and you can build a more fleshed out and interesting game, via your imagination. The fun isn't on the character sheet. The fun's at the table, rolling the dice with your friends and playing the game and imagining.